The sun rose slowly over the pine-covered hills of Montana Territory. Tall trees stretched toward the sky, their tops glowing gold in the morning light. Ethan Walker swung his axe into a thick pine trunk. The sharp crack echoed through the forest. For 10 years, Ethan had lived alone in a small cabin near the logging camp. He was known as the strongest lumberjack in 3 counties, but strength could not fill the empty space in his heart. His parents were gone. He had never married. While other men returned home to wives and children, Ethan returned to a silent cabin. Every evening, he sat beside the fireplace, listening to the wind outside. Sometimes loneliness felt heavier than the giant logs he carried each day. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan rode his horse into the nearby town of Red Creek to collect his pay. The town square was crowded. "What is happening?" Ethan asked an old shopkeeper. The man sighed. "Dead auction." Ethan frowned. Several poor families stood near a wooden platform. In those harsh frontier days, desperate people sometimes sold work contracts to pay debts. Then Ethan noticed someone standing alone at the end of the platform. A young woman. A rough burlap sack covered her head and face. She stood perfectly still. The crowd laughed. No one want that one. Probably hiding something ugly, not worth a penny. The auctioneer looked annoyed. $2. Any bid at all. Silence filled the square. The woman lowered her head. Something about her sadness touched Ethan's heart. Without thinking, he stepped forward. "I'll pay $2. The crowd burst into laughter. The auctioneer quickly struck his hammer. "Sold." As the woman slowly turned toward Ethan, he had no idea that his simple act of kindness was about to change both their lives forever. The laughter of the crowd followed Ethan as he led the mysterious woman away from the auction square. Neither of them spoke. The sack still covered her head, and Ethan felt uncomfortable seeing her treated like an object. When they reached the edge of town, he stopped beside a quiet creek. "You don't have to wear that anymore," he said gently. The woman hesitated. Slowly, trembling fingers lifted the rough sack away. Ethan froze. She was beautiful. Golden brown hair fell over her shoulders. Her green eyes shimmered with fear and sadness. A small scar rested near her temple, but it only made her look more human, more real. She looked down nervously. "You aren't afraid?" she whispered. "Should I be?" Ethan asked. For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. "My name is Clara." "Ethan Walker." She nodded. "Thank you for helping me." Ethan shrugged. No one deserves to be laughed at. For several moments they stood beside the flowing water. Then Ethan noticed how thin she looked. "When was the last time you ate?" Clara's silence answered the question. That evening, Ethan brought her to his cabin deep in the forest. The little home was simple but clean. He cooked stew over the fire, while Clara sat quietly near the window. The orange glow of sunset painted the room. "It has been a long time since I sat in a place that felt safe," Clara admitted. Ethan looked surprised. "Who was hurting you?" She stared into the fire. "People who wanted me forgotten." Before Ethan could ask more, she lowered her eyes. The sadness in her voice carried years of pain. Later that night, Ethan spread blankets near the fireplace for himself and offered the bed to Clara. As rain began tapping against the roof, Clara watched him. Most men would have asked questions. Most men would have demanded answers. Ethan asked for nothing. For the first time in years, Clara felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. Days turned into weeks. Clara remained at the cabin, helping with cooking, cleaning, and tending the small vegetable garden behind the house. Each morning, Ethan left for the logging camp. Each evening, he returned to find warm food waiting and laughter inside the cabin. The lonely silence that had filled his life slowly disappeared. One afternoon, Ethan taught Clara how to ride his old horse, Dusty. She laughed when the stubborn horse refused to move. "You listen better than he does," Ethan joked. Her laughter echoed through the pine trees. It was the most beautiful sound Ethan had ever heard. As summer arrived, they spent evenings sitting beside the creek. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they simply watched the sunset together. One evening, Clara asked quietly, "Why did you never marry?" Ethan tossed a pebble into the water. "I kept waiting for the right person. And if she never came," he smiled, Then I suppose I would keep waiting. Clara's cheeks turned pink. For a moment, neither looked at the other. The forest around them seemed peaceful and endless. Little by little, trust grew between them. Clara began sharing pieces of her past. She spoke of moving often, of hiding, of losing people she loved. But she never explained why. Ethan sensed there was a larger secret buried beneath her words. Still, he never pushed. One night a storm rolled across the mountains. Thunder shook the cabin. Clara woke frightened by a nightmare. Without speaking, Ethan placed another log on a fire and sat nearby until she fell asleep again. His quiet kindness touched her heart more deeply than grand words ever could, and as the firelight danced across the room, both of them realized something neither dared say aloud. They were beginning to fall in love. Summer painted the Montana hills in shades of green and gold. The days were long, and Ethan found himself looking forward to returning home more than ever before. Home. The word had never meant much to him until Clara arrived. One evening, after finishing supper, they sat on the cabin porch watching the sunset. The sky glowed orange behind the endless forest. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered. Ethan looked at her instead of the sunset. "Yes, it is." When Clara realized he was looking at her, she laughed softly and lowered her eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Clara said, "You know, before I met you, I thought kindness was something people only talked about." Ethan frowned. "Someone must have hurt you badly." She nodded. "Many people." The sadness in her eyes made Ethan's heart ache. Without thinking, he gently took her hand. "You don't have to face those memories alone anymore." Clara looked at their joined hands. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to believe someone. The following weeks brought countless small moments. Working together in the garden, riding through the forest, sharing stories beside the fire, laughing over burnt biscuits. Every day drew them closer. One afternoon, while gathering wildflowers near the creek, Clara slipped on a wet rock. Ethan caught her before she fell. For a few seconds they stood face to face. The world seemed to disappear around them. "Ethan," she whispered. Slowly, he brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. Before either could say more, distant horse hooves echoed through the valley. Several riders appeared on the road, leading toward the cabin. Clara's smile vanished instantly. Fear filled her eyes. Ethan noticed. "Do you know them?" Clara stared at the approaching riders. Her face turned pale. "They found me." The riders arrived just before sunset. Their leader was an older man dressed in expensive clothes. The moment Clara saw him, tears filled her eyes. "Eleanor." The man spoke her name firmly. Ethan blinked. "Eleanor?" The stranger climbed from his horse. "I am Governor Henry Whitmore." Ethan nearly dropped his axe. The governor? One of the most powerful men in the territory? The older man's eyes softened as he looked at Clara. "My daughter." Silence filled the yard. Ethan stared at Clara. The woman he knew as Clara was actually Eleanor Whitmore, the governor's missing daughter. Years earlier, bandits had attacked a stagecoach carrying Eleanor and her mother. Her mother had died. Eleanor had survived but disappeared during the chaos. Most people believed she was dead. For years, greedy relatives had hidden the truth while trying to seize the Whitmore fortune. When Eleanor finally escaped, those same people spread lies about her and arranged for her to be sold through debt contracts so she would never return home. Tears ran down the governor's face. "I searched for you for 7 years." Father and daughter embraced. Even Ethan struggled to hold back emotion. News traveled quickly. Within days, the entire town of Red Creek was buzzing. People who had mocked Eleanor at the auction could hardly believe the truth. The forgotten woman nobody wanted was actually one of the wealthiest and most respected women in the territory. Some townspeople suddenly treated her like royalty. Others apologized for their cruelty. But Eleanor paid little attention. Her greatest concern was Ethan. One evening she found him sitting alone beside the creek. "You've been quiet," she said softly. Ethan forced a smile. "You deserve a better life than a lumberjack's cabin." The word struck her heart. For the first time since they met, distance stood between them. The next few days were difficult. Governor Whitmore invited Eleanor to live in his grand mansion in the capital city. Servants, luxury, wealth, and status awaited her. Everything Ethan could never offer. One morning, she found him chopping behind the cabin. "You've been avoiding me." Ethan stopped swinging the axe. "I'm trying to make this easier." "Easier for who?" "For you." Eleanor stepped closer. "You think I care about money?" "You should." "No." Her voice trembled. "I care about the man who showed kindness when everyone else laughed at me." Ethan looked away. "You belong in a different world." Eleanor shook her head. "My father has wealth." She placed a hand over her heart. "You have my heart." The words left Ethan speechless. Just then Governor Whitmore approached. The older man had seen enough to understand everything. He smiled warmly. "Ethan, may I speak with you?" They walked together beneath the pines. After a long silence, the governor said, "Do you know why my daughter loves you?" Ethan shook his head. "Because you saw her value before you knew her name." The older man's eyes glistened. "You paid $2 for a stranger everyone ignored. That act was worth more than all my fortune." Ethan stood quietly. Then the governor extended his hand. "If you truly love her, don't let fear stand in your way." That evening, Ethan returned to cabin. Eleanor was waiting on the porch. Before she could speak, he knelt before her. "Eleanor Whitmore, I may never be rich." Tears filled her eyes. "But I promise to spend every day making you feel loved." A smile spread across her face. "That sounds far better than being rich." "Will you marry me?" "Yes." Autumn arrived with golden leaves drifting through the forest. The wedding took place beside the creek, where Ethan and Eleanor had shared so many quiet evenings. Nearly the entire town attended. People who had once mocked her now celebrated her happiness. Governor Whitmore proudly walked his daughter down a path lined with wildflowers. When Eleanor reached Ethan, both struggled to hold back tears. The ceremony was simple, honest, perfect. As they exchanged vows, sunlight filtered through the tall pines. For Ethan, it felt like a dream. The lonely lumberjack, who once spent evenings alone beside a fireplace, now stood beside the woman he loved. And Eleanor, who had been forgotten, hidden, and treated as worthless, finally found a place where she truly belonged. Months later, the newlyweds expanded the cabin into a beautiful family home. The governor often visited. Laughter replaced silence. Love replaced loneliness. One snowy evening, Eleanor sat beside the fireplace, while Ethan carved a wooden cradle. She smiled knowingly. "You seem excited." Ethan grinned. "I am." A hand rested gently on her growing belly. Soon they would welcome their first child. The future looked brighter than either had imagined. As the fire crackled and snow fell outside, Eleanor leaned against Ethan's shoulder. "Funny, isn't it?" she said softly. "What is?" "The entire town was shocked by who I was." Ethan kissed her forehead. "They were looking at your name." "And you?" He smiled. "I was looking at your heart." Eleanor wrapped her arms around him as warmth filled the cabin. Outside, winter covered the forest. Inside, a family was beginning. And the lonely lumberjack who once bought a forgotten woman for $2 had found something far more valuable than wealth. He had found a love that would last a lifetime.